Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging into something truly ancient today.
Yes, we are. We're pulling insights from excerpts connected to a specific story, number 208 from the Mahallakattheravatthu.
Right. And we've got different versions, some commentaries too, helping us piece together this particular narrative.
And it's not just some old story. It's really powerful, touches on aging, loss, and, well, a pretty surprising teaching from the Buddha himself.
Absolutely. So the scene is Jetavana during the Buddha's lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And it involves a group of elderly monks, a moment of really intense grief, actually.
Yeah, and then this analogy comes up, this unexpected analogy about a forest.
Right. Which pivots everything towards a fundamental truth about suffering and freedom.
So our mission here really is to unpack this specific story.
Yeah, understand the core teaching, the whole cutting the forest thing.
And see what insights, it offers us today.
Yeah.
About our own attachments, the challenge of letting go.
Okay, so let's get into it. Who are we talking about first?
Well, the main characters are this group referred to as elderly monks. The Pali term is Mahallakattheravatthu.
Elderly monks. And the sources make it clear these weren't guys who've been wearing robes their whole lives, were they?
Not at all.
Yeah.
They were actually wealthy householders back in Sotāpatti, good friends, lived prosperous lives, did good deeds together, that sort of thing.
Okay, so they had full lives already.
Exactly. But then later in life, they heard the Buddha's teaching, and it really struck a chord.
Yeah.
They had this realization, kind of like, we're old now.
Yeah.
What's the point of this household life for us anymore?
Makes sense. So they decided to ordain.
That's right. They made this huge decision to become monks, in their later years.
Wow. That's a big shift at any age, but especially then. And the sources mention they faced some hurdles.
Yeah, apparently because they were older, they found it pretty difficult to, learn all the detailed Dharma teachings thoroughly. It wasn't easy for them.
I can imagine. So much to absorb.
They were wise in worldly ways, sure, but the monastic path has its own complexities, right? Both study and practice.
So how did they manage?
Well, they supported each other. They built these simple leaf huts, pangsasala, the texts call them.
Leaf huts, okay.
Yeah, kind of on the edge of the main monastery grounds. And they lived there together as this tight-knit group.
Still keeping those old bonds of friendship?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they kept one particular connection to their old lives, which becomes really central to the story.
Okay.
When they weren't collecting alms food, they often ended up going to the home of the former wife of one of the monks in their group.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
And this is where we meet Madhurapanika.
Madhurapanika, what does her name mean?
Something like sweet-handed or having a sweet touch. And it seems pretty apt, actually.
How so?
Because she was incredibly supportive, really helpful to all of them, not just her former husband.
So she wasn't just putting food in their bowls at the door?
No. The sources say they'd gather the food they collected from different houses.
Right.
And then they'd actually go to her house to eat it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she wouldn't just let them eat what they brought. She'd add her own food, sauces, make sure they were properly looked after.
That paints a picture of a really strong, kind connection there, a deep bond.
Definitely. And that deep bond is exactly why the next part of the story hits so hard.
Okay, what happens?
The sources tell us Madhurapanika. She became ill, and she died.
Oh no, given how close they were.
Exactly. And the monk's reaction, it was pretty intense, not what you might expect from monks sometimes.
How did they react?
They all gathered at the hut of their friend, the one who was her former husband. And the description is quite graphic, actually.
Really?
Yes, as they were holding each other by the neck, just openly weeping, lamenting.
Holding each other. Wow. So raw grief.
Totally raw.
Oh.
And they were crying out things like, the helpful lay follower, Madhurapanika, she's passed away. Where are we going to get that kind of support now?
It sounds like a cry of loss, but also maybe fear? Loss of that vital support system they'd come to rely on.
Precisely. It was deep attachment and the shock of losing that support in their new life as elderly monks.
So this wasn't quiet grief, it was visible.
Very visible.
Yeah.
So much so that other monks noticed them. They asked what's wrong, heard the story,
Yeah.
and they thought, wow, this is significant. Significant enough that they brought the matter up in the Dharma hall where the monks gathered.
So it reached the Buddha's ears.
It did. The Buddha arrives, asks what everyone's discussing, and when he hears about the elderly monks and their intense sorrow over Madhurapanika.
What does he say? Does he console them?
Well, his response is,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's surprising. He doesn't immediately console them in the way you might expect.
Okay.
He basically says, look, This intense sorrow, this level of attachment you're showing for her, that this isn't new. You've done this before.
Done this before. What does he mean?
He means across lifetimes. He says this pattern of deep attachment and painful grief regarding her has happened in previous existences.
Whoa. Okay, that's a twist.
Yeah, and he immediately launches into a past life story to illustrate it. It's known as the Kaka Jataka, the crow Jataka.
So he tells them a story about crows.
Exactly. He reveals that in a past life, these very monks, they were born as crows.
Okay.
And the female crow they were all deeply attached to back then. That was the same being as Madhurapanika in this life.
Wow. So the connection goes way back.
Way back. And in that crow life, the story goes they were all near the ocean. And this female crow, she got swept away by a huge wave, carried off and killed.
Oh, wow. So loss again, but in a different form.
Right. And how did the male crows react?
Let me guess. Intense grief.
Intense grief, yes. Crying, lamenting, just like the monks. But then they did something else.
What?
In their absolute desperation, fueled by this attachment, they decided they were going to empty the ocean.
Empty the whole ocean.
The whole ocean. Using their little crow beaks, drop by drop, to get her back.
That's incredibly futile. It's absurd.
It's perfectly absurd. And that's the point, isn't it? It illustrates the sheer impossibility, the futility of trying to fight against inevitable loss when you're driven by such powerful clinging.
Yeah. Trying to empty the ocean with a beak. It's an amazing image for that kind of struggle.
And the Buddha even quotes a verse from that Jataka story, supposedly what the crows eventually realized.
What'd it say?
Something like, "Indeed, our jaws are tired and the mouth is parched. Let us desist. We cannot empty it. The great ocean just keeps filling up."
So even they eventually saw it was pointless.
They did. And by telling this story, this almost comical, tragic story from the past,
Yeah.
the Buddha wasn't making light of their current grief. He was pointing out this incredibly deep, long-standing pattern of attachment to this specific person across lifetimes.
Ah, okay. So the focus shifts from the specific loss to the underlying attachment.
Exactly. He's showing them. This clinging itself is the root that leads to this kind of suffering and this kind of, pointless struggle, whether it's weeping uncontrollably or trying to empty an ocean.
Okay, that makes sense. It sets the stage for a deeper teaching then.
Precisely. Because right after telling the crow story, he turns to these elderly monks who are probably still reeling a bit.
I bet.
And he delivers this core instruction, very succinct. He says, "Cut down the forest, not the tree." Vana jandatha moruka.
Cut down the forest, not the tree.
Okay. What did the monks make of that?
Well, remember, they're relatively new monks, maybe still thinking very literally.
Right.
So according to the commentaries, they hear forest and cut down, and their first thought is,
grab an axe.
basically, they think, oh, the Buddha wants us to go chop down the actual trees out there.
Huh. Okay. An understandable mistake, I guess.
A bit amusing, yeah. But the Buddha quickly clarifies, no, not that forest.
So what forest was he talking about?
He's talking about an inner forest, the forest of defilements, the Kilesa Vana, forest of defilements.
Okay. And he named the main trees in this inner forest. Passion or craving, raga. Aversion or hatred,
Osa.
dosa. And delusion or ignorance, moha.
Vaiga, dosa, moha. The big three.
The big three. He's saying these are the things that need cutting down. These are the roots of suffering, the things driving reactions like their intense grief.
And he connects it to fear, right? The analogy continues.
It does. He says, just like you might feel fear in a real forest, fear of wild animals getting lost,
Yeah.
the fear we experience in life, fear of rebirth, aging, sickness, death, all that stuff, it arises from this internal forest of defilements.
Ah, so the internal state is what generates the fear, not just the external situation itself.
Exactly. It's the Kilesa Vana that's the real source of danger, the real source of fear.
Okay. And the commentaries dig into this forest idea even more, don't they?
They do. They make a distinction between the main forest, which is Vana,
Right, Vana.
which you can think of as the big major defilements, the really deep-seated cravings and aversions that keep us stuck in the cycle of suffering, sasa.
Like the main tree trunks, maybe?
Yeah, good way to put it. And then there's the undergrowth, or maybe forest dwellers, called vanaha.
Vana. So what's that?
That's like the smaller stuff, the persistent, sticky little habits of mind, minor attachments, the ways we keep clinging, even in small ways. Think of it like brambles or dense underbrush.
Okay, so not the huge trees, but all the stuff that still tangles you up.
Exactly. And the point is, even that smaller stuff, the vanaha, is important. It keeps feeding the cycle, keeps producing results, keeps you stuck.
So you can't just chop down one big tree, one specific attachment.
Right. If you don't clear the whole forest, the vana, and the undergrowth, the vana.
It just grows back or pops up somewhere else.
Precisely. You have to get at the entire ecosystem, the root system of these defilements.
So how do you cut down this internal forest? Did the Buddha say, not with an axe, presumably?
Definitely not with an axe. The sources are specific. They say this forest, both the vana and the vanata, must be cut with the knowledge of the fourth path.
Knowledge of the fourth path. Okay, that sounds significant. What does it imply?
It points towards a very deep level of insight, the kind of realization that comes through dedicated practice on the path to liberation, to nibbana. It's not just intellectual knowing, it's a transformative understanding that cuts right through the delusions fueling these defilements.
So it's about developing profound wisdom.
Profound wisdom, yes. And the Buddha connected this right back to the monk's specific situation.
How so? With their grief over Madhurapanika.
Yeah. He used another analogy, a calf tied to his mother.
A calf.
He explained that as long as even a tiny bit of the vanaha, the undergrowth, and he specifically mentioned the part related to attachment, like their attachment isn't cut,
Right.
then the mind remains bound, it stays tethered, just like that calf is tied to its mother, unable to roam free.
Wow. So even a seemingly small, persistent attachment is enough to keep you stuck.
That's the idea. That one thread of clinging keeps the mind from real freedom. It linked their very specific personal grief directly to this universal teaching about cutting the roots of attachment.
So what happened to the monks? Did this teaching land? Did it help them?
It definitely landed. The
Right.
sources state that right at the end of this discourse, after hearing the crow story and the forest teaching,
Yes.
those elderly monks attained the fruit of stream entry, Sotāpatti.
Stream entry. Wow, that's the first stage of enlightenment, isn't it?
It is. It means they gained a direct, irreversible insight into the nature of reality, suffering, and the path. An insight powerful enough to start cutting through those deep-rooted defilements they'd carried, apparently, for lifetimes.
That's incredible. From weeping uncontrollably to stream entry, just from hearing that teaching.
It shows the power of the right teaching at the right moment, hitting the core issue. And it wasn't just for them either. The texts mentioned the discourse was beneficial for others who were there listening too. It highlights the universal nature of the message.
So the core message really comes through then.
Yeah, I think so. It's that our deepest struggles, our suffering, it doesn't ultimately stem from the outside world, from the losses and changes themselves,
From
our internal forest, our own cravings, aversions, delusions, and all those sticky little attachments, the vanaha, that keep our minds bound up.
And freedom comes from working on that internal landscape, cutting that forest.
That's the real work. That's the path to peace, even when, life's ocean waves inevitably sweep things away. Not trying to empty the ocean.
So quite a journey we've taken with these monks. From well-off household jobs,
Grieving old man.
back to being crows trying the impossible.
All leading to this really profound teaching about inner transformation. It's quite something.
It really is. And the takeaway seems clear. Look inward. Stop battling the external waves so much.
Right. Stop trying to control the uncontrollable, like those poor crows.
And start paying attention to the internal forest. That's where the real work lies, the real path to freedom.
And this ancient analogy gives us, a way to think about it. What are the big trees, the vana, in your own mind? The major patterns of craving or aversion. And what's the undergrowth, the vana? Those smaller, persistent habits, the little ways your mind gets tethered, like that calf. The things you keep tripping over.
It's a challenging question. How might really seeing our own internal forest, the big trees and the undergrowth, how might that change how you approach your own struggles? With letting go, with loss, with just change?
Yeah, it's a powerful thought to leave with, rooted in this very, very old story.